It sounds cliche, but in
Yeah.
general, the salespeople don't like the CRM. They don't see the value. They
Yeah.
don't see how that helps them complete their work. And in a lot of instances, they're right. CRM was constructed purely by the direction of the executive committee, but very little thought is generally put into, all right, how are the salespeople actually going to be interacting with the system?
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Your CRM system is key to managing your customer relationships and providing the customer experience to help you stand out among your competitors. While most organizations may use some form of CRM system, the adoption rate is low. Most CRM systems are either over-engineered, making them difficult to use and maintain, or under-engineered with data quality issues, a roadblock to CRM system adoption. In today's episode, we have our guest, Seamus Ruiz-Earle, who discusses the core reasons for the low adoption of CRM systems among sales teams. He also discusses how to evaluate a CRM and the nuances of selecting a CRM for specific industries considering their unique business processes. Finally, he provides insights into why data integrity, security, and migration issues are essential to consider while selecting and creating standard operating procedures around CRM processes to avoid significant dollar expenses because of data corruption and integrity issues. Let me introduce Seamus to you. Seamus Ruiz-Earle is Managing Director of Carabiner Group, a leading Salesforce consultancy. At 18, he was recognized as the youngest trailblazer and Dreamforce keynote panelist in Salesforce history. Today, he leads a group of subject matter experts who embrace long-term partnership to optimize CRM across a wide variety of industry verticals. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey, welcome to the show, Seamus.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Good to be here.
Okay, it's a pleasure, and I'm super excited to discuss the topic of CRM, and anything related to sales is always exciting for me. So, just to kick things off, do you want to start with your personal story and your current focus?
Absolutely. Thanks. Yeah, I guess it starts actually as believe it or not, a 17-year-old trying to break into the investment banking industry. I wanted more than anything to work in high finance. And so I cold called a whole bunch of investment banks, said, give me a job, I'll do anything. 25 of them said, no way, kid, you're too young. Number 26 said, hey, we need some help with our CRM. Have you ever heard of Salesforce before? As a 17-year-old, I never had, but I spent the next 6 months learning the system, becoming familiar with it, and ultimately ended up working with that bank part-time for the next 2.5 years, helping them with their CRM. Along the way, I learned a lot. I was able to speak at various different events and really made the decision to transition and work more on the CRM marketing automation side rather than in the high finance space. And since then, have had the great opportunity to kind of grow a firm and work with customers all across the United States, Europe, and APAC.
Okay, wonderful. So the entrepreneurial journey is going to be very exciting. Obviously, I am going to be digging a lot in your CRM journey and different implementations that you have seen. But before we do that, we have one of the standard questions here, and that is going to be your perspective on growth. When you think of word business growth, what does it mean to you?
You know, growth is such an interesting topic, right? Because it is so, in my opinion, industry specific in that it hinges very much on the tactical decisions that you make on the industry that you enter into, the way you structure your business, and ultimately the way that you promote your business, right? A consultant is going to be not nearly as effective if they don't embrace the consultative, method of selling. Whereas a manufacturing, business, the consultative selling may not be the right way to go. And so I think that really my perspective on growth is looking at those who have gone before, recognizing the pitfalls that they have come up against, and amending your journey to try and avoid as many of those as possible, right? Every entrepreneur fails, but if we can avoid those failures and sort of springboard that growth further by learning from those who have come before us, I think that's, the best way to approach it.
Yeah, interesting perspective. And I'm very interested in the comment that you made related to manufacturing, right? So I'm actually going to give you a little bit brief in terms of the kind of, manufacturing verticals that we typically see and their CRM needs. So as you know, as you have already stated, that manufacturing is slightly different overall from the CRM needs perspective, overall the way their sales cycle work. So majority of the manufacturers that we are going to have are going to be either some sort of make to stock, or it's going to be make to order is the term that we typically use in the manufacturing space. So typically make to stock is going to be where you are storing something in the inventory and you are selling, let's say, through your distribution channels. Majority of the manufacturers sell through their distribution channels, unless they are more of the engineering shop. And in case of engineering shop, what is going to happen is you are going to get an order for a specific part, and then these manufacturers are going to be working on that specific part and supplying that. From the sales cycle perspective, as you can see in the make to stock scenario, right, they are going to have many different sales channels. It's going to be your sort of the wholesale channel, which are your distributors. Then in case of engineering, the journey is going to be very different. And typically you don't have as much marketing automation. So from this, description, can you talk about different nuances of different sales cycles that you have seen in the industries you have worked with, and some of the lesson learned that you have for these manufacturing customers or the listeners?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of highlights that you touch on there that are important to pick on. And one of those is the importance of handling those various different channels, right?
Yeah.
Your CRM is supposed to serve in theory as, the system of record for everything. And sometimes if it's not manufactured the right way, if it's not set up correctly, it can be difficult to get the clarity into the data that you would want to. An example of this would be one of our clients is a manufacturer based out of the Midwest, and they have distributors across the United States, in Canada, in South America, in Europe, and they've got, maybe 100 different distributors. And when we first started working with them, they didn't have, a way to track the various different metrics from each of those channels because each was different, right? And an often misunderstood misconception of a CRM is the fact that it just works out of the box, right? And in reality, most of the time it needs to be custom tailored to your business and specific business needs. Now, once you get it there, right, that can be one of the greatest value adds possible. When you can tell that your distributor working out of Australia is performing miles ahead of the distributor working out of New Zealand, right? Similar areas, similar markets, that Australian distributor is doing something different, right? And that can lead you to go speak with them, gain insights into what they're doing, and then manufacture, hopefully, replicate that success in your other distributors, passing on best practices, tips and tricks, and that sort of thing. That's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Realistically, the CRM can do so much more. You're collecting all of this data. Once you get to that point, you can make that data actionable. You can say, hey, over the last 6 months, 40% of the deals that get to a particular stage in your sales cycle actually close. And you can forecast that out from a CFO perspective to be able to have much more insight into the dependability of your revenue, the dependability of your funnel, and ultimately just be much more educated about the decisions that you're going to be, necessarily be making to foster that growth inside the business.
Okay, so one of the interesting things that you mentioned during our pre-show is salespeople sometimes don't necessarily like the CRM, or they don't feel like entering the data. And obviously, in our case, when we are working with CRM or ERP, or for that matter, any system, data is the foundation. Data quality is always going to be the foundation. So what have you done, or what have you seen in your experience that number one, these salespeople don't really feel like interacting with the system, or what are the challenges that you have seen why they don't like to interact with the system?
Yeah, it sounds cliche, but in
Yeah.
general, the salespeople don't like the CRM, right? They don't see the value. They
Yeah.
don't see how that helps them complete their work. And in a lot of instances, they're right. CRM was constructed purely by the direction of the executive committee,
Yeah.
purely by the direction for having quote unquote insight into what's going on in the company, reporting and that sort of thing. But very little thought is generally put into, all right, how are the salespeople actually going to be interacting with the system? And that's the Achilles heel, right? Because if the data doesn't get in, then you're not able to act on it. And there's things that we generally tend to look at. One is how much of that data collection can we automate, right? There are
Yeah.
necessarily data pass-throughs from ERP or other systems through, an API connection where we can port data in an automated fashion so that as much as possible is kind of taken off of the salesperson's back, right? Whether that's,
Yeah.
automatically tracking emails or phone calls or, link clicks, this sort of thing can be ported into a CRM relatively easily. The other element of it is to incentivize the salespeople to actually put the data in. And, there's two elements to that. There's the carrot and the stick, right? Which one is more
Yeah.
effective? And ultimately, I think it's a combination of both, right? If you make a mandate that you don't get paid on anything that doesn't live inside your CRM, they're going to be pretty quick to start putting that data in. But if we can incentivize them through the carrot method, right, of asking them, okay, in a perfect world, what would your CRM do for you that
Yeah.
would actually add value, right? Listen to them, do focus groups, understand their impulses, and then actually put that in place. They're automatically incentivized to do it. Not only does it make them more efficient in their jobs, usually, salespeople, they want to spend as much time selling as possible. And so they're up for whatever it takes to kind of help them do that.
Yeah.
And as a result, you get the data clarity and the data quality that is so actionable and such a priority later on.
Yeah, and I am actually going to tell you a brief story of my experience, to be honest. And this is the perception I also had, especially when we talk about the manufacturing sector. My perception of manufacturing was always that, especially even if you talk about, salespeople, that they are not going to be as technology savvy. But when I visited one of the customers and this particular salesperson was super excited, and it's not just one salesperson, okay, it was their entire team. And their comment was, you know what? If I'm not going to have CRM, then how am I going to remember all of these interactions that I have been keeping in my CRM? So they were really living the CRM journey the way it is supposed to be done, because you want to make sure that when you are talking to your customer, you want to make sure that you are remembering all of the interaction, and before they open their mouth, you want to tell something that you really care for them. I mean, that's a way to sort of show the care for your customer. So in their case, what they did is, obviously they had this email add-on, and as part of the email add-on, what they, it was super easy for them because they didn't really have to visit the CRM, right? So what they did is they were doing the data dump using this email add-on, which is amazing. But when you get into the migration scenario, right? So migrating data is always going to be tricky. So you did mention that when you migrate from one CRM to the next, obviously it's going to be very tricky and always going to be expensive process. And from my experience of doing the data work, I know that how tricky it is going to get to migrate these email objects, this technical data, to be able to get to the next CRM system. So tell me your perspective. Do you recommend, let's say, these email add-ons as part of the interaction? Does it create any issues when you do the migration, especially when you are migrating from one CRM to the next?
I think that there's always going to be very serious considerations
Yeah.
whenever putting in a process like that, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, you have to think about, all right, what's your strategic plan? We started out talking about growth, right?
Yeah.
In the manufacturing space, growth is so dependent on numerous factors, but one of those is scalability of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
In my opinion. And the simple fact of the matter is that everybody out there can think of, in an existing business, that one person who knows everything there is to know about the product, right? The
Yeah.
tribal knowledge is all in that person's head, and it's so valuable, right? A
Yeah.
person leaves, retires, does whatever, that knowledge is gone forever and becomes entirely unactionable unless you have a plan in place to pull it out and put it in a place where people can access it after that person's left. And I think that that's something that's often overlooked, right? When we're talking about these systems, an email add-on, that could be the right way to do it. A notepad app, that could be the right way to do it. There's so many different ways. They're coming out with new things every day now, where this call right here could be automatically transcribed and attached to a Salesforce record or something like that. These things are coming out, and we'll see even more of it over the next few years. But what you really have to think about is the roadmap. That's what it always comes down to for me.
Yeah.
If you're comfortable being a 10-person company, working in a small scale environment, very specialized equipment, entirely relationship driven, you're selling to 5 major customers in the United States, and that's your entire market. Well, maybe it's not as important to have a super specced out system, process, et cetera, et cetera. If you're looking to grow that 5-person team up to 50 or 100, process from the very beginning becomes so important. Even from an inventory management perspective, even from a closing on quarters to tracking the process of orders, to tracking where that case is in transit, has it hit the dock yet? All of these various different elements become that much more important to have right from the beginning, or if not have right from the beginning, have a goal in mind that you want to get to. Right. A great example would be a company that we've worked with, manufacturing space. They work in specifically high tech industrial manufacturing equipment.
Yeah.
And it's very, very much custom, made to order pieces. And it's oftentimes the case where you'll need to have insight into, budgets if it's an institution, or fiscal quarters if it's a corporate setting. And by leveraging the CRM, this organization was able to increase their clarity of the overall picture of the business and allocate resources appropriately. An example of that would be, rather than pushing to produce all of those different stages and setups at the end of one quarter, they were able to, basically triage and say, actually, these 3 systems should be done this quarter, these 4 the next, and these 5, their budget isn't ready. We can push them to the next one. And they didn't need to buy the inventory to produce those. They didn't need to invest the time in lab techs to build them. All of these various different parts of the business all came through the data clarity that they could have because they set up their CRM correctly from the get-go, right? And as a result, they have, they've been able to grow significantly because they have that greater clarity and that greater confidence in the data that they're seeing.
Okay, amazing. So I definitely want to touch a little bit more on this migration aspect because we see a common trend in the system community when let's say some of these manufacturers are buying the CRMs. So their inclination, obviously, they don't necessarily have as much IT background or data migration background, and sometimes these issues could be tricky to deal with when you are moving from one system to the next. When you buy, let's say, one CRM system, and you are going to think that this is really easy to probably understand. Maybe they bought it because they felt that it was going to be super easy for them to pick up, to set up, to train their salespeople. They simply buy it, but the next CRM system that they are going to get, obviously they are going to outgrow that CRM system and they need the next one. So migrating data from one system to the next is always going to be time consuming. It's always going to be risky. It's also going to be very expensive, especially if you're talking about manufacturers who are probably paying, let's say, $100, $200 per month in their CRM. And all of a sudden, if they are going to see a bill of, let's say, $50,000, $100,000 for migrating this data, it could be a tricky situation to be. So tell us, from your technical background, obviously, why is migration so difficult when you migrate CRM 1 to CRM 2?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic, right? Because ultimately, whenever you start a business, cash flow is of integral importance, right? Manufacturing even more so because you have to worry about the materials and the capital that you're pushing into that. So CRMs and software in general is often the first place to see cuts. Going with the less expensive options. And we can't really fault people for doing that because it's at the beginning and they don't have the cash flow to make that change. The problem comes where basically the analogy that we use is you're trying to take a let's call it a circular shape and place it into a star, a star
Yeah.
hole, right? And that you have to trim here and you have to add a little bit there and you have to mold it all together and make it so that it fits just right for the new data model, right?
Yeah.
And that's the challenge, is that it is time intensive. It is extremely time intensive, and any consultant or consulting business or data migration business charges by the hour, most
Yeah.
likely, right? That's their metric, that's their service. And so when you really look at it, the overall investment that you save at from the beginning to say year 2 of your business by using a budget CRM tool, that might be, useful, and it might have enabled you to get to a certain level, but ultimately it's going to cost you in the long run, simply because you have to take something as simple as a date being formatted month, day, year, and change that to be year, date, month, right? And that gets replicated across hundreds of fields and dozens of objects and multiple different systems, let alone saying, all the different integrations that you might have with your ERP system and with your accounting and with your financial department. So it's just one of the most challenging elements possible. And that's why I personally place a huge advantage on taking the time from the get-go and saying, again, what is our plan for growth, right? Being realistic about it, not saying you're going to go from 0 to 100 million in a year, unless that's realistic for your industry, but really being realistic and saying, okay, if we hit this number in revenue, we really are going to need a real CRM. Doesn't make sense to make that investment now, or at the very least get to something similar to that, so that the migration doesn't cost an arm and a leg.
Okay, so interesting comment there with respect to real CRM. So obviously, the when we talk about the basic functionality of CRM, I mean, majority of the CRM systems, I know, I mean, they are probably going to have some sort of way of capturing the lead. They are probably going to have some sort of way to capture the opportunity, maybe an account, right? This is all standard. Now, obviously, when we talk about a very sophisticated CRM system, the name could be Salesforce or any of the competitors, right? Or it could be any other CRM. So these CRMs are designed for a specific purpose. They are designed to keep a specific industry in mind. In my mind, when I look at any of these systems, if they are designed for a specific industry, if you try to implement that system in a completely different industry, okay, irrespective of how good the system is, it's not going to work because it's not really designed for that. So from your experience, what are some of the things that you have seen in case of a CRM that let's say the manufacturer should definitely look for while evaluating a CRM?
Well, I think that there's a couple of different elements. One is, how complex are your channels, right? We touched
Yeah,
on that before. Where are your leads coming from, and how enriched are they when they come in?
yeah,
The second is, what does your sales process look like once the lead is in place, right?
yeah,
Because, if you want it to be very customized, a lot of people, right, you got to think about this. If you're setting up a CRM for the first time, it means that you've probably gone through and experienced something from another firm before, right?
yeah,
You've experienced another company's sales process, and there will be elements of that sales process that you really want to sit down and document and say, I want this functionality, I want that one, I want to be able to send emails, I want to have triggers, I want to have all of these various different function sets as part of my sales process. And finally, you want to be able to think about, how do you want your CRM to integrate with the other systems that you have in place? No
yeah,
one is going to be able to say that, yeah, CRM is going to do everything that you need. You're going to need an ERP, you're going to need an accounting system, you're going to need, maybe a human resources system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And too often the decision is made without considering all of those different elements.
yeah.
And you get down that road and then realize, oh, wait, it can't integrate with my ERP, or it can't integrate with my accounting system, or it doesn't actually have the ability to fire off triggers and do the various tasks that I wanted it to do. And that's where you see kind of the difference between the term that I use, or real CRMs and fake
Yeah.
CRMs, or whatever you want to call it, base level, is that most of the inexpensive options, the ones that are, kind of created, are meant for simple, not terribly advanced, complex sales cycles. They're meant to serve almost as just a lead tracking mechanism, a Rolodex,
Yeah.
digitally. And if you want to be able to make that data eventually be actionable, you want to kind of have that in mind from the get-go. Again, there's nothing wrong with having a simple sales cycle, or a simple sales process, but you just have to recognize if you have one or not when you're making the decision. Because The worst possible solution would be, hey, we think it's going to, it's simple now because I have one salesperson, but a year down the line, you might have 10. And then what, right? Does it still work in what you want it to do? 2 years down the line, you might have 25. What are the different challenges there? So really taking that strategic look at it and saying, okay, what do I want the system to do and how do I want to get there? That's where it really becomes critical. An example of this one would be, and actually an ed tech that we work with.
Yeah.
And in their instance, they started out very consciously by subscribing to the base level of Salesforce. It was something like $25 a user a month, something like that. Still more expensive than a free CRM, right? And at the time, it was a significant investment for the company to make. Fast forward, 4 years, they've been able to grow, going to the $75 a user a month up to the $150 a user a month as they've grown, unlocking those feature sets that they thought that they would need back 3 years ago. And so that they've saved the money along the way. They haven't been paying out the nose for the solution, but they've been able to avoid that costly data migration and ultimately know exactly when they need it, that they're going to be able to turn on those other feature sets and make use of them. A similar case could be made for manufacturing, right? Right now there's 2 channels. It's pretty simple. Okay, you don't need anything super complex, but all right, next year you're planning on going intercontinental, or next year you're planning on opening up a different product line tailored to a specific, channel of institutions, educational institutions. And that that's just going to be much more complicated and you're going to want it, that process to be customized. Well, then you need to pick a system that's able to do that. And a lot of these, free products or inexpensive products just don't have the malleability that more of the enterprise level candidates do.
Okay, so let's talk about some of these channels a little bit more. So let's say, obviously, there could be a lot of different ways of interpreting a channel. So are these channels defined, especially in a CRM system? Are they going to be more from the perspective of sales process, or are these real sales channels, the way the sales channels work in the physical world? So can you provide some examples of these sales channels?
Yeah, I mean, a sales channel could be anything from partnership that you have with a company to a person on the ground in another country to, a website, right? That may or may not be branded for your organization, or maybe it's a reseller. Yeah. All of these various different things, more likely than not, if you have a sophisticated system, will be treated differently, and the sale will be conducted differently. Different margins, different production processes, different delivery processes, right? All of those get set aside, and you have to consider very carefully, all right, what is it that I want to have happen? In a sophisticated system like that, those would be treated differently in an internal way, right? They would be treated, I want to see all of my leads, all of my sales that came from my channel partner in Austria, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you pull a report. All of that detail has been passed into a CRM, and you can report on it, making it actionable, right? You definitely want to be able to make your system fit your process, because each channel is so uniquely different, right? At least the channel designation would be, right? A channel partner can mean so many different things. It can, and the relationships there can be so different. And so from a CFO perspective, you'll be able to have greater reporting and forecasting if you do it in a smart way. From a COO perspective, you'll be able to say, okay, here's where the operations are falling apart when we get these leads in from this particular channel source. This is a hot spot. The only way that you're able to make those, again, key management decisions is to see the data and make the actionable intel. As a C, it is so often that we're forced to make these critical decisions. And the unfortunate reality of the situation is that a lot of people don't have the data in front of them to make them in a smart way, in an actionable way that ultimately affects your company, it affects your employees, it affects your customers, right? Whereas if you can see that data and make the educated decision, you'll be able to be much more confident in those choices, much more assured in sort of the events that might be coming, and that sort of icing on the cake, you'll be able to ultimately become more profitable and allocate resources, in a more efficient, optimized way.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I would like to go a little bit deeper into this, and let's talk about some of the roles of these entities, right? So when we look at mapping the physical process that we might have from the sales perspective, and obviously that needs to be mapped in the system, the way the system is designed or defined. But then, in some cases, I'll give you some example, right, of scoping of all of these entities. So for example, let's say if we take an example of a lead. Now, a lead for you could be very different from how I would like to understand or define a lead. So sometimes because of that misunderstanding, what is going to happen is, what I could put the entire company in my lead. And irrespective of the CRM system you use, I mean, obviously there is a reason why they are calling it as a lead, and there is a scope of, of that lead, how that should be treated and how that should be mapped. But let's say if somebody is doing the CRM implementation by themselves, I mean, they just don't know. They might create tons and tons of custom fields, and based on that, they might capture the data just because they didn't know that, they are supposed to be mapping this process completely. So do you have any stories or example where, people have simply over-engineered the system, and because of that, you had tons and tons of issues? Do you have any examples or stories there by any chance?
Goodness, I mean, where to begin, right? That's the unfortunate reality of the situation, is that any way you go, there are always risks and pitfalls, right?
Yeah.
In that you over-engineer the system, and you're right, you'll have hundreds of custom fields that need to be maintained. You under-engineer it, and you don't have the data that you need to make those intelligent decisions that we're talking about. That ed tech company that I was speaking about before, we were engaged because they had a data cleanliness issue where they had tried to export information and re-import it back in. They managed to mismap the fields, and ultimately their entire database was fouled up by this import. And they were seeing different states everywhere and all sorts of things. And ultimately it happened because they had over-engineered the system.
Yeah.
And they thought, I need to store every single piece of detail in an individual field. I need to do it in this particular way, simply because this is what my own, logic tells me. And I'm very fond of saying that, like, you hire smart people and you ask them to tell you what to do rather than telling them what to do. And in this instance, I think that was something similar, where they just went kind of seat of their pants. They made that decision without thinking about it from a point of data and saying, all right, what is the logical way to do this from a subject matter expert? On the flip side, right, when you're looking at optimization and saying, hey, you're tracking some data in here, but it's not really the smartest subset of data that could be considered actionable later. Let's say that you've got 5 custom fields in here when you really need 15. Yeah. That's a better problem to have, in all honesty. I mean, in one of our clients' cases, they were simply tracking the relationships that they had, the person at the company, what type of product they were selling to that person, the revenue that was coming back. But they weren't going the level deeper. They weren't saying, okay, specifically, what is the problem that person is trying to solve? What was the element about this deal that made us successful as opposed to our competitors? And so on and so on. And I think that ultimately ties back to the fact that that's the greatest potential for growth. I'm sure that many of the listeners here have a CRM right now, and they might be wondering, how do I make that? How do I make the change? How do I make it more actionable? And you really have to sit down and think, all right, what would I want to know? In a perfect world, if I had perfect clarity, what is the detail that I want to know about this deal that would help me close it? And if you can't get that detail at the time of the deal, well, you get it after the deal, right? And you put it back in. You can create this historical backlog. You can analyze deals based off of the historical nature of them, where this one took 45 days to close and it has this particular factor, whereas that one took 60 days to close and it takes a different type of factor. You can imagine all of these components slotting together to be able to give you, I say it again, the actionable intel that's so crucial to operating a business, in an intelligent way.
Okay, interesting. So one of the things that you mentioned in your comment related to this whole Excel interfacing with the CRM, obviously, one of the notion or the comment that we typically get when people compare, let's say, CRM versus ERP, they just seem to think and believe that, CRM is going to be slightly easier and ERP is going to be, slightly more difficult or maybe outdated to some extent. And one of the reasons why they feel this way is obviously data structure that we are going to have in case of an ERP that is very tight. Okay, it has a lot of rules. So whatever crazy things that we can do, let's say in the CRM world, we will not be able to do those in ERP. So one of the story and the example that I am actually going to tell you related to CRM, especially with respect to the Excel interfacing. Obviously, I love it, the interfacing of the Excel. just because I can do a lot of data manipulation, right then. And obviously my system is not going to complain as much as long as I have some or decent understanding of how the Excel interface is going to work. Let's say if I'm simply importing a lead on the CRM, or maybe I'm importing some of the opportunities, right? So one of the instances and the example that I have seen in a company where the person, he or she just didn't know how to properly do the import in the CRM, and they actually did the import using the spreadsheet. And after that, oh my goodness, it was a chaos. Okay, they were seeing all of these random data elements inside the CRM, and the company did not know how to fix it, to be honest. They hired a bunch of consultants, and even for them, it was very hard because they were not able to track how basically to fix this situation. So obviously, the Excel functionality or the interface could be great, but I mean, the CRM is not going to have as tighter control overall from the rules perspective. So obviously, if you break your data and if you are doing it on the live instance, because if you don't have, let's say, the test instance in some of these smaller organizations, you don't even have that. And let's say if you corrupt this data, right? Would you recommend providing the Excel functionality to the entire team? What would be your process when you are sort of allocating these permissions for the Excel interface of the CRM? Would you recommend that they need to have some sort of test system before the data can be promoted in the live system in the CRM? So overall, from the Excel interfacing perspective, what would be your recommendation in creating the procedures so that nobody goes through this experience?
Lock it down. That's my perspective, right? I mean, literally millions of dollars, probably you're getting close to billions of dollars a year are lost because of bad data. And this is an issue, right? Of people bringing stuff out into Excel because they don't like working inside of Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever they're working in, screwing up the data and then pushing it back in again, right? It's, first of all, it's unnecessary, right? Any high quality CRM will be, it could enable you to make that change, make those changes in the system, right? Where you don't have a concern about corrupting the data. And secondly, your data quality and cleanliness is so important. There needs to be a justified method through which changes are made en masse. And that really sits down in deciding who is the responsible party who has the knowledge, expertise, and skill set to control that. It happened recently. Someone well-mannered in one of our clients in the southern region of the United States, they are our manufacturing client, and this individual decided that they wanted to enrich their contact database, and they exported it out in Excel. They merged it with another database, and they tried to re-import it, and it created 168,000. Say it again, 168,000 duplicate contacts.
Oh, wow.
168,000, right? That not only got synced to every single person in the company's cell phone, it also had drastic implications for, like account management, right? Because the territory was based on how many people are in this company. And so counts got shifted around, territories got shifted around, all sorts of bad stuff, right? Luckily, we were engaged with that client and we saw it happen as it happened, and we were able to reverse the changes because we caught it in time. With that being said, most people aren't that lucky, right? And you're completely correct of once it happens, a consultant who gets brought in to fix it is sort of operating in the dark. They don't know your business, don't know your processes, they don't know what's supposed to be there and what isn't. And that too gets very, very expensive. And so being more conservative with the security over your data, right? Who can pull data out? Who can push data back in? That's always a smart move from a CRM perspective.
Hey, Seamus, this has been an insightful discussion. That's it for today. Do you have any last minute closing thoughts by any chance?
Yeah, I think that this is such an important topic, regardless of which industry you're in, but particularly in the manufacturing world, because the CRM can be so much more than just a system of record, right? We like to use an analogy where the CRM is like the center of the wagon wheel, right? Where all of these spokes are going out to the various different systems and all the data is being brought in and made actionable inside of your CRM. And if you take that step, right, if you take that leap and really choose to invest in it, the implications for the business are just huge, So much of what we do today is relationship driven, and a CRM has relationship in the name, right? That's what it's meant to do. It's supposed to help you build relationships and sell systems better in a much more personable way, automating it, just making your team that much more empowered to do the good work that you know that they can do. So ultimately, my closing thoughts are to keep in mind is optimization and efficacy, right? People can get there by optimizing their systems and becoming more effective in the way that they think about their sales processes.
Yeah, interesting. And my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be IT systems are hard. Just because you are getting $30 subscription, it does not mean that IT system is going to be any easy. So be conservative the way you utilize your system and the way you provide control to your team. On that note, I really want to thank you for your time, Seamus. It's been a fun conversation. I learned so much.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Seamus, head over to carabinergroup.com. It's CARABINERGROUP.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Jill Walker, who discusses why CRM is important and how that fits among other systems such as ERP and e-commerce. Also, the interview with Jeff White, who discusses why it is so important to identify the ideal customer profile for your offerings to streamline your growth. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.